November 18th, 1944. Hürtgen Forest, West Germany. The fog was so thick it clung to the trees like wet wool, muffling every sound except the distant thud of artillery somewhere deeper in the woods. The men of 2nd Platoon, Company F, 1st Infantry Division, moved in single file, boots sinking into mud black as oil. Frost steamed from their breath. Every step felt like trespassing. At the head of the column, Staff Sergeant Mike Donnelly lifted a clenched fist, signaling a halt. "You hear that?" he whispered. Nothing. No birds, no wind, just the faint tick of melting frost dripping off pine needles. Behind him, PFC Owen Mercer, the radio man, adjusted the handset slung over his shoulder. "Sarge, Intel said Krauts pulled out of this sector yesterday." "Intel said a lot of things in this damn forest," Donnelly muttered. They were approaching a narrow ravine, barely 20 yards wide, its floor swallowed by dead leaves and fallen branches. On the map, it was marked as unoccupied terrain, a shortcut through a gnarly hill system that had stalled the 1st Infantry Division for days. But the Hürtgen had a reputation. Nothing here was ever unoccupied. The column moved again. Donnelly slid down the first slope, boots skidding on loose soil. The air grew colder as the walls of the ravine closed around them. Trees pressed overhead, blocking what little light seeped through the cloud cover. The place felt wrong, too quiet, like walking into a sealed room. Behind him, Corporal Lewis, BAR gunner, grumbled, "Feels like a damn funnel. One mortar shell and we're confetti." "Cut the chatter," Donnelly said, though the same thought wrapped around his spine like ice. They were halfway down when the first clue appeared, a glint, a tiny metallic reflection on the ridge to their right, like sunlight kissing a bottle cap. But there was no sunlight. Donnelly froze. His eyes narrowed at the tree line above. Another glint, then another. Then he saw it. A silhouette behind a log, a muzzle pointed down at them. His throat tightened. "Contact!" He didn't finish the word. "Bert!" The ravine erupted. 40 MG-42s worth of gunfire, coming from every direction at once. Left ridge, right ridge, dead ahead in the choke point. A U-shaped wall of fire. The first burst tore straight through Corporal Lewis before he even turned his head. Men dropped as though someone had yanked their legs from under them. Bark exploded off trees. Dirt geysered into the air. Bullets snapped overhead so fast the air itself screamed. "Down! Down! Get to cover!" Donnelly roared. But there was no cover. The ravine floor was naked earth. The platoon scattered, diving behind roots, rocks, anything. The MG-42s cut the ground in ribbons, stitching trails through the mud like sewing needles made of lightning. Mercer crawled behind a stump. Radio slammed against his chest. "Jesus Christ, they were waiting for us!" "No shit!" Donnelly yelled, dragging a wounded rifleman by the webbing. "Stay low!" Another burst chewed through the wood above them. Splinters peppered Donnelly's helmet. He felt one slice across his cheek, warm blood mixing with cold sweat. The gunfire didn't come in bursts. It came in streams, perfectly overlapping, perfectly coordinated. This was no hasty ambush. This was a kill box. "Left ridge, I count at least 10 guns," Mercer shouted. "More on the right," someone screamed back. A bullet smashed into the stump behind Mercer, exploding it like rotten fruit. The radio man yelped, covering his head. Donnelly wiped mud from his eyes and peered toward the far end of the ravine. He could barely see shapes behind camouflage netting. German gunners, braced in pre-dug positions, barrels smoking from constant fire. "We gotta get fire on those ridges," Donnelly yelled. "We can't even lift our heads," Private Parks cried, pressed flat to the dirt, helmet vibrating from the shockwaves. A mortar shell crashed behind them, showering the ravine with shards of stone. Panic rippled through the platoon. They were pinned so hard they could barely breathe. "Mercer!" Donnelly shouted over the deafening roar. Call in fire mission right now! I can't, Sarge. I need clearer coordinates. Just do it! Call it on our own grid if you have to. Mercer's blood ran cold. That meant artillery landing dead on their position. But there was no other choice. He grabbed the handset, voice shaking as he spelled out their location to HQ. Request immediate fire. Danger close. Repeat, danger close. We are under heavy... shit! An MG burst chewed through the radio antenna, ripping it clean off. Sparks spat into the mud. Mercer stared at the broken handset in horror. Donnelly's eyes widened. The machine guns paused, only for a second, as the gunners changed belts. Smoke curled over the ridgelines like breath from a sleeping beast. Donnelly lowered his head into the dirt, jaw clenched so tight his teeth hurt. "We're not getting out of this," someone whispered. Donnelly refused to believe that, but he had no idea what to believe anymore. The forest held its breath. The guns clicked, belts locked, and the ravine lit up again. The second barrage slammed into the ravine with a violence that felt almost personal. Dirt kicked into the air in long, violent sprays. Branches snapped, rocks shattered. The sound wasn't just loud, it was a physical force, punching the air from their lungs every time a gun cycled. Burt, burt, burt. 40 cutting saws of steel. Donnelly pressed himself into the earth so hard he tasted mud. Bullets zipped an inch above his helmet, each one a hot whisper of death. To his right, Private Parks was clawing trenches into the soil with his bare hands, trying to bury himself alive. "They're gonna wipe us out. Jesus, they're gonna wipe us out." "Shut up and crawl!" Donnelly barked. He grabbed the kid's collar and jerked him down just as another burst shredded the brush where Parks's head had been a second earlier. Farther up the line, a scream cut through the gunfire. "Medic! Medic, I need a med!" A single MG-42 stitched across the sound. The scream stopped mid-breath. Every man who heard it felt their guts twist. Mercer flattened himself behind the shattered stump, cradling the dead radio like a lifeless infant. "Sarge, without artillery, we're screwed. They're tightening fire. They're walking it toward us." Donnelly peeked over the stump, an inch too high. Whip! A bullet snapped the rim of his helmet, ripping off a chunk of steel. He dropped back down, ears ringing. "They want us to bunch up." Mercer blinked through sweat and mud. "What?" "This ravine," Donnelly growled, "is a slaughter chute. They don't need accuracy. They just keep the fire overlapping. We stay here, we die here." Another shell crashed on the ravine lip, shaking loose a rain of dirt that coated their helmets. Corporal Hensley slid into cover beside them, face pale beneath a streak of blood running from his temple. "Sarge, they're pushing infantry down the far end. Saw movement. Helmets, rifles." "Infantry?" Donnelly frowned. "Why send infantry when their MGs are doing the job?" "Maybe they're coming to finish us off," Mercer whispered. "Or haul off prisoners," Hensley spat. "You know what they say, nobody comes back from German interrogation in this forest." Donnelly grabbed Hensley's arm. "You sure about what you saw?" "Positive. Squad-sized element, descending from the far ridge." Of course, a U-shaped ambush. MG-42s pin, infantry sweeps, clean, simple, lethal. The worst part? It was working perfectly. Donnelly forced himself to think. "How many rifles we got still firing?" "None!" someone yelled from behind a fallen log. "We can't lift our heads! You stand up, you die!" Panic fluttered down the line like an infection. Another MG burst tore through the side of the ravine, ripping open the ground inches from Donnelly's elbow. Heat stung his skin. Parks curled tighter against the earth. "Sarge, what do we do?" Donnelly shut his eyes for half a second. He could picture the German machine gunners up on the ridges, cool, steady, disciplined, letting the recoil push the barrels into predictable sweeps. They knew the terrain. They had mapped this kill zone. They had waited. And they were going to erase 2nd Platoon unless something changed right now. He crawled through the mud until he reached Mercer again. "You said the radio's dead, the handset's fried, but what about the backup battery?" Mercer hesitated. "We have juice, but no antenna. I can't reach anyone." "You don't need to reach everyone," Donnelly said. "Just enough signal to get a grid out. Even a broken transmission might get picked up." Mercer stared at him, realization dawning. "Sarge, if HQ hears danger close, they'll drop shells on our heads." "That's the idea." Before Mercer could respond, something else caught Donnelly's eye. A faint, drifting movement in the fog above the left ridge. A helmet, followed by another, and another. German infantry moving in. "They're flanking!" Donnelly shouted. "Left ridge is moving! Left ridge!" MG-42s shifted fire, suppressing the American right side, making space for the German assault team. They moved like ghosts through the mist, rifles low, expressions cold and methodical. It was happening. The finishing stroke. Donnelly's heart hammered against his ribs. "Mercer, open the set. Try anything. Tap the grid into the handset with the damn battery wires if you have to." Under fire, Mercer ripped open the radio's back panel. Sparks jumped as wires snapped. "Give me a minute." "You got 30 seconds." The first German grenadier reached the midpoint of the ridge. Another soldier behind him dropped prone, setting up an MG-34. "They're bringing machine guns down into the ravine," Hensley yelled. "They'll be firing level, straight at us." "Everyone prepare to move," Donnelly roared. "On my word." Move where? It didn't matter. Better to die charging than die curled like animals in the mud. A rifle shot cracked from the ridge. A bullet punched into the dirt next to Donnelly's knee. "Mercer!" he shouted. "Tell me you got something!" Mercer twisted 2 wires together, wincing as a spark burned his thumb, then slapped the handset to his mouth. "Hit us!" he screamed. "Grid 735942, danger close! Drop now! Drop now! Drop!" The radio exploded in sparks. Mercer hurled it aside, chest heaving. "Did it go through?" Parks asked. "I don't know," Mercer whispered. The forest groaned as the German machine gun on the ridge locked into position. Then the gunner pulled the bolt. The first round chambered. Donnelly felt the ground tighten beneath him. Whatever was about to happen would happen fast. The German gunner settled behind the MG-34, cheek welded to the stock, finger tightening on the trigger. From where Donnelly lay, he could see the faint glint of the barrel through the mist, long, black, hungry. "Down!" Donnelly bellowed. But the gunner never fired, because the world fired first. Whoom! 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 The ground convulsed. A distant howl swelled into a monstrous roar, and suddenly the ridgeline behind the Germans exploded in a tower of earth and fire. The blast slapped the ravine like a giant's hand. Donnelly's helmet rang. His teeth clacked. Leaves, branches, and pieces of God knew what rained down on them. "Artillery!" Mercer screamed. "Sarge, they heard us!" A second shell landed 30 yards further up the ridge, blowing 2 German riflemen clean off their feet. Their helmets spun through the air like tossed coins. The MG-34 kicked sideways, unmanned, clattering down the slope. Parks covered his head. "They're dropping it right on top of us!" "Keep your faces down!" Donnelly roared back. "Let it walk!" A shell detonated so close that Donnelly felt the shockwave punch through his ribs, hollowing the air from his lungs. Dirt avalanched down the ravine walls, coating the platoon in a heavy blanket of mud. But the German advance stopped instantly. They scattered, some diving behind rocks, others sprinting back up the ridge, all of them shouting over the thunderous barrage. Mercer spat mud from his mouth, chest heaving. "Sarge, that was maybe 20 meters from us." "Closer than that," Hensley coughed. "I felt it in my damn spine." The third shell hit the far end of the ravine, right where the Germans had planned to funnel through. A cascade of broken trees toppled like dominoes. Fire, smoke, splinters, bodies, it all blurred into a single, violent image. Donnelly forced himself upright enough to scan the ridges. Through the fog and drifting smoke, he saw something he hadn't expected. The German machine gunners were abandoning their nests. Some left their MG-42s behind, others tried to drag them while stumbling through the chaos. The neat, surgical kill box had collapsed into raw panic. "We've got to move," Donnelly shouted, "while they're disorganized." "Move where?" Parks cried. "The shells are coming down both sides." "We move with the gaps," Donnelly snapped. "Watch the cadence. Listen!" Another howl built in the sky. Not where they were lying, but close. Very close. He slammed his fist into Mercer's shoulder. "That's the bracket. They're adjusting. Once they shift it forward, we rush the left wall, up the slope." Hensley looked at him like he'd lost his mind. "We're charging uphill into the ridge the MGs were on?" "That ridge is empty now," Donnelly barked. "They pulled out." "And what happens if the next shell hits us instead of the Krauts?" Parks asked, eyes wide with terror. Donnelly didn't blink. "Then we die here. Pick one." A fourth shell ripped through the tree line on the right ridge, collapsing an entire section of earth. Flames licked up through the shattered roots. The German guns on that side went silent, either buried or abandoned. A fifth shell crashed behind the fleeing German infantry, kicking men into the air like rag dolls. The barrage was shifting forward. This was their moment. "On my mark!" Donnelly shouted, voice hoarse. "Left slope! Move in bursts!" The platoon tensed like coiled springs. Another howl, another distant thud, another tremor. Then Donnelly screamed, "Go! Go! Go!" They launched themselves from the ground. Men scrambled up the muddy slope, grabbing roots, branches, anything their fingers could hold. Boots slipped, hands tore, breath burned in their lungs. MG fire sputtered from the far ridge, panic fired, inaccurate, but still deadly. Bullets snapped into trees above their heads. Donnelly shoved Parks upward. "Keep moving!" Mercer tripped, sliding backward. Donnelly seized his pack, hauling him up with a grunt. "Come on! You're not dying in a hole today!" Artillery boomed again, this one behind them, so close the shockwave threw 3 men against the slope like dolls. But the Germans were in worse shape. A machine gun team attempted to reman their position just 10 yards above Donnelly. The assistant gunner barely had time to swing the ammo belt over the feed tray before a U.S. shell obliterated the log cover in a blast of fire and dirt. The gun vanished. The men vanished with it. Parks screamed, "Sarge, the shells are chasing us!" "That means move faster!" Donnelly shouted. They reached the top of the ridge just as another artillery burst swallowed the lower half of the ravine behind them, turning the place they'd just crawled through into a churning cauldron of earth and flame. Donnelly collapsed behind a fallen pine tree. His chest burned from exertion, his helmet rang, his ears dripped with cold sweat. But they had made it. They were alive. Below them, the ravine boiled with fire and smoke. German silhouettes fled in every direction, abandoning their perfect ambush in total chaos. Mercer lay on his back, gasping, 17 minutes of hell. Donnelly didn't respond. He was staring down at the ravine floor, at the bodies, at the shredded earth, at the cratered kill zone they had just escaped. He whispered, "This forest eats men alive." Then, Automatic fire erupted from the tree line ahead. The Germans weren't done. The new burst tore through the trees above their heads, spraying bark like shrapnel. Donnelly rolled instinctively, dragging Mercer with him as bullets chewed into the pine trunk they had been leaning against seconds earlier. "Contact's front!" Hensley bellowed. "They cut us off!" No time to breathe, no time to regroup. They had escaped the ravine only to run headfirst into another German blocking force, likely the outer ring of the ambush, meant to catch any survivors who slipped the kill box. Shapes moved between the trees, gray coats, crouched silhouettes, the glint of steel helmets. A German squad, maybe more, firing in disciplined volleys. Parks ducked behind a mound of roots. "How many of them?" "Enough," Donnelly barked. "Lay down fire!" But barely anyone had a clear line of sight. The fog clung low over the ridge, thick as battlefield smoke, hiding the enemy's positions while revealing their muzzle flashes. Lewis, blood still streaked from the earlier impact, braced his BAR against a fallen log. He took a breath, then unleashed a ripping burst downrange. "Got one!" he shouted as a German soldier folded into the brush. But the reply came instantly. 3 rifles snapped back. One shot hit Lewis square in the shoulder, spinning him backward onto the ground. "Lewis is hit!" Parks shouted, scrambling toward him. "Stay down!" Donnelly snapped, grabbing Parks by the webbing. "You stick your head up, they'll take it off." Lewis gritted his teeth, clutching his bleeding shoulder. "Sarge, I can still fire. Just give me the BAR." "You can't even sit up," Donnelly growled. The Germans shifted again, flanking, always flanking, moving like wolves through the pines. "They're trying to pincer us," Mercer yelled. "Not if we move first," Donnelly said. His brain was already ripping through options like pages in a manual he'd written himself. Behind them, the ravine roared again as more artillery shells pounded the German fallback routes. The boom, shock, boom rhythm shook the ridge under their knees. Smoke drifted upward like black fingers reaching for the sky. The platoon was trapped between 2 hells, American artillery behind them, German riflemen ahead. No retreat, no rest, just the forest, just the fog, just the killing grounds of the Hurtgen. "Mercer, take your rifle. Hensley, with me. We push left and find a blind spot." "And do what?" Hensley asked. "Break their flank." Parks swallowed. "Sarge, that's suicide." Donnelly stared back, eyes hard as flint. "It's suicide if we stay here. Moving is the only thing keeping us alive today." The Germans fired again, measured bursts, calculated, tightening like a noose. Bullets smacked the pine trunk so hard, Donnelly felt the impacts through the bark. He signaled with 2 fingers and crawled low along the ridge. Mercer followed, face smeared with mud, breath ragged. Hensley moved on the other side of Donnelly, holding his M1 like he wanted to strangle someone with it. They slipped behind a thicket of tangled roots and fallen branches. The fog swallowed them instantly. Halfway through the crawl, Donnelly heard it. German voices. Close. Too close. He held up a fist. The men froze. 10 yards away, 2 German soldiers crouched behind a log, reloading. One spoke in hurried, clipped German. The other scanned the ridge, searching for American movement. Donnelly didn't wait. He surged forward, boots barely pressing the earth, rifle swinging up. He fired twice, 2 sharp cracks. Both Germans dropped before they even knew they'd been flanked. "Good," Hensley whispered. "Good." "Keep moving," Donnelly said. "They're not alone." As if to prove him right, another burst tore overhead, forcing them flat. Germans were shifting right, trying to sweep the ridge clean of survivors. They had minutes, maybe less, before the line collapsed. Donnelly pointed toward a granite outcrop jutting from the ridge like a stone shoulder. "We take that rock. If we hold high ground, we stall their pincer." "Then what?" Mercer asked. "Then we counterpunch." They reached the frozen rock just as the German squad advanced. Donnelly slid behind it, sighted down his M1, and fired the moment a helmet popped through the brush. Hensley opened up beside him, each shot deliberate, almost calm. Mercer reloaded so fast his hands blurred. The Germans halted, surprised to find resistance on the high ground. Their formation buckled. Some ducked behind trees, others dropped prone. But the MG team among them didn't hesitate. They set up a bipod, locked the belt, racked the charging handle. "Oh no," Mercer whispered. The MG-42 opened fire. The rock saved them. The rounds sparked off the granite in showers, slicing the air around their heads. "We can't hold this long," Hensley shouted. "We don't have to," Donnelly said through gritted teeth. "We just have to break their momentum." But the Germans kept pressing. More figures emerged through the fog, maybe a second squad reinforcing the first. The entire ridge lit with muzzle flashes. Donnelly's men were outnumbered 2-1, maybe more. A round ricocheted off the rock and grazed Mercer above the eyebrow. Blood streamed down his face. I'm good," he insisted. "I'm good." Another burst smashed into the ground behind them. The forest felt like it was collapsing inward. Hensley fired again. "Sarge, they're pushing both sides. They'll overrun us." Donnelly scanned the right flank. Movement. He scanned the left. More movement. A full German push. A tightening ring. This was it. "Sarge!" Parks shouted from the rear. "They're coming up behind us, too." The pincer had closed. Donnelly's stomach turned to ice. They were surrounded. And the forest was closing in. For a heartbeat, no one moved. Even the fog seemed to freeze in place, the kind of stillness that comes before something terrible. Then the forest erupted. Rifles cracked from behind them, sharp, clean snaps that sliced through branches. Chips of bark exploded around Parks as he dove behind a stump. "And they're all around us!" he screamed. Donnelly's pulse hammered. The Germans had executed the perfect counter-ambush, classic Hurtgen tactics. Drive the Americans uphill with machine guns, then let the secondary squads spring the cage. "Form a ring!" he yelled. "Short arcs! Keep it tight!" The men shifted instinctively, creating a loose defensive semicircle around the granite outcrop. M1s snapped into shoulders, bar drums clattered, boots dug into the frozen slope. The Germans pressed closer. Fog shape-shifted into silhouettes, helmets, rifles, the faint shimmer of bayonets. Their boots barely made a sound on the pine needles, ghosts moving through their own haunted forest. Hensley fired first. A German soldier collapsed into the brush. "Contact left!" Hensley shouted. 3 rifles fired back instantly. Mercer ducked, blood dripping from his eyebrow wound. "Sarge, we can't hold this, not with just rifles." "Then make every shot count," Donnelly barked, firing 2 rounds and watching a figure stumble into the mist. A burst from the MG-42 ripped through the tree line again, sending men diving flat. The sound was deafening this close, like a metal saw chewing the world apart. Trees splintered. Needles showered down like rain. From the right flank, Lewis, pale and shaking from blood loss, propped himself against a log and fired short, controlled bursts with his BAR. "Get some!" he growled through clenched teeth. Then a rifle cracked from 50 yards away. A round slammed into Lewis's thigh. He screamed and hit the dirt, BAR dropping beside him. "Lewis is down again!" Parks shouted, scrambling toward him. "Parks, hold position!" Donnelly roared. "If you leave that arc, we all get flanked!" Parks froze, torn between fear and instinct, then crawled backward to his sector, hands trembling on his rifle. The fog thickened, near solid, almost soup-like. The Germans used it like a curtain, advancing in short rushes, barely visible except for their muzzle flashes. Donnelly fired again. Another silhouette collapsed. But for every one he dropped, 2 more appeared. And still, the noose tightened. A German voice barked orders in clipped, confident tones. Not panicked, not rushed. They knew they had the advantage. Mercer faltered. "Sarge, what if they're calling mortars? We're high on the ridge. They can bracket us in seconds." "They won't waste shells on their own men," Donnelly said. But even he wasn't sure. Another volley of German fire ripped across the ridge, bullets snapping branches into toothpicks. O'Donnell, digging in beside Mercer, shouted, "Sarge, right flank's getting heavy!" Donnelly swung his M1, sighted through the fog, and spotted muzzle flashes. He fired, and again, and again. "Sarge!" Hensley yelled. "Left side's peeling back! They're trying to roll our line!" Of course they were. Textbook German infantry doctrine. Fix, flank, finish. And the platoon had maybe 16 men still combat capable. "Sarge, what do we do?" Parks cried. Donnelly didn't hesitate. "We counter their flank." He rose to a knee, and a bullet smashed into the granite beside his head, spraying his face with stone dust. "Down!" Mercer grabbed him by the webbing, dragging him back. The German squad on the left pushed harder, weapons raised, boots silent on the needled soil. One soldier tossed a grenade. Donnelly saw the tiny metal egg arc through the air. "Grenade! Where? Left! Left!" Men dove. Dirt blasted upward in a violent bloom. The shockwave thumped their chests. Parks coughed, ears ringing. Donnelly forced himself upright, adrenaline drowning out the pain in his legs. "We're breaking out," he said. Hensley stared at him. "Breaking out where? We don't even have a direction." "Downhill," Donnelly growled. "Toward our lines." "That ravine's still hot," Mercer warned. "Not the ravine." Donnelly pointed to a narrow slope between 2 shattered pines, steep, rocky, barely wide enough for single-file movement. A goat trail, almost invisible, but it sloped west, back toward American territory. "It'll bottleneck us," Hensley said. "Yes," Donnelly said, "but bottlenecks work both ways." He fired a quick burst, forcing the German squad to drop and scatter. Then he shouted, "On my signal, fall back by pairs!" A bullet snapped past his ear. "Keep firing!" The platoon laid down a desperate wall of fire, every rifle roaring, every muzzle flash stabbing through fog. MG-42 fire slowed as Germans took cover, surprised by the sudden ferocity. "First pair, move!" Mercer and Parks bolted toward the goat trail, slipping on needles and mud. "Second pair, move!" Hensley dragged Lewis by his webbing, cursing with every step. "Third pair!" O'Donnell and Smitty broke from cover, sprinting low and fast. Germans shouted, orders rising in pitch. They realized too late what was happening. Donnelly fired until his clip pinged empty. He jammed another in, fired again. "Last pair, move!" He was the last man on the ridge. German boots thundered through the fog behind him. He took one final shot, dropped a charging figure, then dove down the goat trail after his men, sliding on his side as bullets ripped into the dirt where his feet had been. The forest blurred around him. Branches whipped his face. Mud smeared across his uniform. Boots skidded over loose rock. Behind them, German voices grew louder. They were coming fast. The chase had begun. Donnelly hit the slope hard, boots skidding on wet pine needles as gravity yanked him downhill. He half ran, half fell, branches whipping his face, his rifle bouncing against his chest. The goat trail was barely a trail at all, just a broken animal track plunging sharply between jagged roots and slick stones. Shouts echoed from above. Schnell! Vorwärts! Halt sie auf! Hurry! Forward! Stop them! German voices. Close. Too close. Bullets cracked through the trees like snapping whips. Bark burst from trunks along the trail as the pursuers fired blindly, trying to suppress the Americans as they fled down slope. Ahead, Hensley was dragging Lewis, who was grimacing with every jolt. "Come on, Lewis, move your damn legs!" Lewis groaned, blood soaking through his thigh bandage. "I am moving. You're just pulling too hard." "Then stop being heavy." Mercer and Parks were 10 yards further, sprinting in a crouch, lungs burning, helmets bobbing as they dodged between trees. Donnelly slid in behind them, boots barely finding traction. "Keep moving! Don't stop!" A rifle shot barked from above, and a bullet smacked into a branch inches from Donnelly's head. Wood chips rained across his shoulders. He ducked instinctively. "They're right on top of us!" The trail narrowed dangerously, forcing the platoon into a single-file line. A mistake on this slope meant a broken neck, or rolling back uphill into German rifles. Donnelly steadied himself on a trunk, then pushed on. The forest turned into a blur of brown and gray and fog. A machine gun burst ripped across the ridge behind them, high, inaccurate, but terrifying. The MG-42 team was repositioning somewhere above, trying to angle fire down the slope. The stitching sound followed them like an unbroken scream. Brrrt, brrrt. Rounds cut through treetops overhead. Parks shouted, "They're trying to walk the fire down on us!" "Stay low and move!" Donnelly yelled. The trail suddenly dipped steeper, almost a drop. Parks slid first, landing awkwardly in a patch of wet leaves. Mercer followed, tumbling sideways. "Ow, God, my ribs!" Then Lewis and Hensley reached the drop. Lewis gripped Hensley's arm like a lifeline. "Don't you let go of me! Shut up and jump!" They slid together, hitting the ground hard and rolling. Lewis cried out, clutching his leg. Donnelly came last. He planted his boots, braced, and launched himself down the incline. He hit the ground, rolled twice, and dug his fingers into the earth to stop himself. He barely had a second to breathe before German shadows spilled over the ridge above them. They were coming fast, lean shapes with rifles tight to their bodies, helmets low, feet pounding the slope. Donnelly raised his rifle. "Contact rear! Lay fire!" The men turned and unleashed everything they had. M1s cracked, BAR rattled. Rifle flashes lit the fog like fireflies. 2 German troops went down instantly, one tumbling headfirst into a tree, the other sliding unconscious into the brush. The rest scattered, taking cover behind trunks and stumps. But they didn't stop. They kept coming. Donnelly fired again, grazing a helmet. The soldier ducked behind a trunk, returning fire with a Mauser round that hissed past Donnelly's ear. "We have to move now," Donnelly ordered. "But Lewis," Parks said. "He's walking," Lewis grunted, pushing himself up. "I'm not dying in this forest." Donnelly grabbed him under the arm, and the platoon pressed forward, plunging deeper into the Hurtgens' shadows. The trees closed tighter. The fog thickened. The trail widened slightly, just enough for 2 men to run side by side. Mercer sucked air through his teeth. "Sarge, how far to our lines?" "Quarter mile, maybe less," Donnelly said. "Terrain's rough. Stay tight." Behind them, the Germans reorganized. New shouts, new bursts of fire. A mortar thumped in the distance, not aimed yet, but close. Very close. Donnelly's stomach dropped. If the Germans got even a rough bracket, they'd be wiped out. "Pick up the pace! Move!" They ran. Branches slapped their faces. Roots snagged their boots. Mud splashed high as they pushed through the forest with everything left in their bodies. Then, a clearing appeared ahead. Not large, just a thin break in the trees, but sunlight, pale and cold, seeped through it like a promise. "That's the fire break to our sector," Mercer cried. "Go!" Donnelly shouted. They burst into the clearing and stopped dead. A German machine gun nest sat on the opposite side, camouflaged, hidden until the moment they stepped into the open. The MG-42 barrel swung toward them. Hensley's eyes widened. "Oh, hell." "Get down!" Donnelly screamed. The gunner opened fire. Brrr, Bert. Bullets shredded the clearing. Soil kicked up in violent bursts. Mercer dove left. Parks dropped flat. Hensley slammed Lewis into the dirt and threw himself over him. Donnelly dove behind a stump as splinters exploded around him. Pinned, exposed, nowhere to run. The machine gun cut a perfect arc across the firebreak, like a scythe. "They were waiting here too," Mercer shouted over the chaos. "A blocking position!" "They knew our escape route," Hensley snarled. Of course they did. The Germans had fought this forest for years. They knew every ravine, every goat path, every natural choke point. The noose was closing from both sides. Mercer pressed himself tight to the ground. "Sarge, we're boxed in." Donnelly clenched his jaw. Not yet. Not while he could still think. Not while his men were still breathing. He looked right, looked left, looked up at the ridges, calculating. Then his eyes stopped. A fallen tree, massive, hollowed, its trunk blown open by old artillery fire, lay 10 yards to their left. Behind it was a shallow depression leading toward a thicker stand of pines. A blind spot. A chance. Donnelly slammed his hand into the ground. "Listen up!" The machine gun chattered again, sparks jumping from stones in front of them. "We're making a break," Donnelly said, voice low but solid. "Left side, hollow log, move in a wedge." "Sarge, that's suicide!" Parks yelled. "So is waiting," Donnelly snapped. He chambered a fresh round. "This is it. On my command." The MG-42 paused to reload. Donnelly's heart kicked like a mule. "Now!" Donnelly exploded off the ground before the echo of his shout even faded. Boots hammered the frozen earth. Mud splashed. Branches whipped. The platoon surged left in a desperate, uncoordinated sprint, men stumbling, half falling, half diving toward the hollowed log. The German gunner saw them move. He rammed the fresh belt home. The MG-42 roared back to life. "Bert!" Bullets carved up the clearing behind them, kicking geysers of dirt into the air where they'd been seconds before. A round sliced the collar of Donnelly's jacket, ripping it open like a knife. Another smashed into the log just as Parks dove through the opening, splinters exploding across his face. "Get in! Get in!" Donnelly yelled. Hensley shoved Lewis ahead of him, practically throwing the wounded man into the hollow trunk. Mercer slid in next, gasping for breath. O'Donnell, Smitty, and the others scrambled through after them, piling into the cramped wooden tunnel like terrified animals fleeing a fire. Bullets peppered the log with a deafening tat-tat-tat-tat, tat punching through the rotten bark, spraying the air with dust and wood chips. "Keep low," Mercer shouted, arms over his head. Lewis groaned, curling in on himself as another burst chewed into the exterior of the log. "We're gonna get shredded in here." "Quieter," Donnelly hissed. "They can hear everything." The machine gun paused again, maybe adjusting, maybe overheating, maybe repositioning. It didn't matter. Every heartbeat felt like stolen time. Donnelly crawled forward, inching toward the far end of the log where daylight seeped through cracks. Beyond it, he could see the shallow depression and a denser wall of trees, thick enough to break line of sight, thick enough to disappear into, if they reached it. He pressed his helmet to the damp earth and looked back. All their faces were caked with dirt, sweat, and fear, but alive. For now. "Listen," Donnelly whispered. "When I say go, we sprint, high and left, straight into the pines." Hensley swallowed. "Sarge, it's open ground." "It's 30 yards, Donnelly said. 30 yards buys your lives." Mercer nodded, jaw set. Parks tried to steady his breathing. Lewis wiped blood from his thigh and muttered, "I can run. I can run. I can run." The MG-42 barked again, aiming low now, angling to punch straight through the log. A round blasted through the woods 6 inches from Hensley's ribs. "We're out of time," Donnelly snapped. "On 3!" The gunner reloaded. It was the tiniest window. 1! He heard German boots pounding toward their right flank, infantry closing. 2! A second machine gun began to set up farther down the ridge. He could hear the bipod legs click. 3! They exploded from the log. The air filled with shouts, American and German, overlapping in a chaotic, hellish chorus. Donnelly sprinted through the clearing, boots tearing up mud, lungs burning like fire. His men followed, some upright, some hunched, some dragging wounded. It didn't matter. They moved like a single organism, driven by pure survival instinct. The MG-42 screamed to life again. Bullets tore into the ground at their heels. A branch snapped next to Mercer's head. Parks stumbled but kept running. Hensley grabbed Lewis under the shoulder, practically carrying him forward. "Keep moving!" Donnelly roared over the gunfire. They reached the depression just as the German gunner corrected his aim. Brrr-ta-ta-ta. 3 men dove. 2 rolled. Donnelly threw himself sideways into the brush, crashing through ferns and deadfall, tumbling hard. His chin slammed into a rock, black sparks flashing behind his eyes. He forced himself up, staggering. "Count off!" he shouted. "Here!" Mercer cried. "Here!" Hensley answered. "Lewis, here! Goddamn leg!" "O'Donnell, here!" A pause. "Smitty! Smitty!" Silence. Then, faintly, from behind the depression, I'm here!" Smitty dragged himself out of a tangled clump of roots, helmet dented, lip bleeding, but alive. Donnelly exhaled, just once, before shouts erupted again from behind them. The Germans were furious. The ambush was broken, the encirclement shattered, their prey slipping between their fingers. "Move!" Donnelly commanded. "Deeper into the trees!" They plunged into the pines. Branches slapped. Roots hooked at their boots. Fog swallowed them once more. But the gunfire didn't follow. German voices echoed distantly, but the woods absorbed them, thickening, softening, muting. The forest became a maze, twisting, bending, separating hunter from hunted. And finally, after what felt like hours but was maybe 5 minutes, the sounds faded entirely. No more MG-42s. No more rifle cracks. No more shouts. Just their ragged breathing. Just the quiet. Just the forest. Donnelly leaned against a tree, chest heaving. Mercer slid down beside him, shaking. Parks knelt, hands on his face. Lewis collapsed onto a patch of moss, exhausted but grinning weakly. We made it," Mercer whispered, voice trembling. Donnelly didn't answer right away. He listened, really listened to the silence around them. Then he nodded once. "Yeah," he said softly. "We made it." He looked at each man, bloody, terrified, exhausted, but alive. "All of you," Donnelly said, voice rough, "did the impossible today." Hensley spat mud and grinned. "Just another day in the Hurtgen, right?" "No," Donnelly said quietly. Today was a miracle. The forest groaned in the wind. Somewhere far away, artillery thumped. But they were out of the ravine, out of the choke point, out of the noose. They were going home. And though the Hurtgen would swallow thousands more before the campaign ended, it would not take them. Not today.